Hi and welcome back to a new video. Today we have the chance to take a look at this colorful RTX 5080 Ultra. For me it's quite interesting because Colorful is a vendor that is simply not available in Europe and Germany. But from my perspective they always deliver quite interesting products when it comes to design and also function. Their software is also usually pretty good, so I'm very interested to see what they did with this 5080 Ultra in the OC edition. Thermal Grizzly Duronaut is our new high-end thermal paste and the successor of Cryonaut. It's even better performing, it is much easier to apply, it is cheaper, and it's much more durable. That's where the name comes from. Especially if you're now maybe considering to buy a new PC, then I would highly recommend that you're looking into this thermal paste. So let's continue with this video. My first impression of this card was really good. It just has a nice design, also with this illuminated part on the top that I set to a pink color to match the backplate that we will see later, and also for example, those small pink accents that you see on the bottom. Also, the motherboard that we're using and the memory both come from Colorful. It's also interesting from a marketing perspective that they even send stuff to me. You have to keep in mind that this is, I think, mainly sold in China. Not even sure if it's available somewhere else in Asia or in the US. But the fact that they're still providing hardware to me and they won't benefit from this, yeah, thanks Colorful for that. And I think we will just take a look at the motherboard and the memory quickly. But before we get to that, I quickly want to talk about coil whine and the noise level, because both of these factors are very important to me. The coil whine on this card is hardly noticeable. Sometimes you don't hear anything at all, which is great. The noise was measured from 20 centimeters distance with 46.8 decibels, thus being slightly more quiet than the 5080 Founders Edition, but a little bit behind a 5080 Astral in the Q mode, which makes sense because the 5080 Astral also is larger in terms of the cooler, so it makes sense that this one is a little bit smaller but has to dissipate the same amount of heat, so will be slightly louder, but still in an okay range from my perspective. One might now think, why am I even covering hardware that I just can't buy? Well, if we increase the demand for this, maybe Colorful can change the strategy and still offer this in different parts of the world, maybe the US or also Europe and Germany. That would be kind of cool. I only found the board listed at one retailer in Malaysia, and there it was listed for, if I translated the currency, for about 190 US dollars at the time of shooting this video, which sounded kind of reasonable to me for a B650 motherboard with also having PCIe Gen 5 primary PCIe slot, so that's kind of okay, I would say, also considering that it is a white edition. Also, the memory is interesting. They call this the iGame Shadow, and also looking at the specs of 6000 C28, I would say that's a perfect match for any of the recent AMD Ryzen CPUs, and also visually, design-wise, also perfectly matches with both motherboard and also the GPU. But now to the main part of the video, which is again the 5080 iGame Ultra. And as I said before, we have all those pink lines already, and now if I flip it over, that's what I wanted to say earlier in the video when I said it just perfectly matches if you change the color to something like pink because of the backplate design. And I think also if you mount this horizontally and then in combination with the other parts, I think this looks quite cool. I really like the design of this card. Has some semi-transparent windows where you can look onto the card with some rainbowish effects if you tilt it. So just overall, that's a pretty nice design. That's what I like about Colorful. They just do their own thing. That's what I also loved about the cat edition. Just hope they release another 50 series cat edition. On the front in the I/O area, you can see this button, which is labeled with normal and turbo. If you go over to the Colorful website and read about this button, it will tell you that it's for one-click OC. But it's not really for one-click OC. I already tried it. It doesn't really one-click OC, but it's still important to have this button. The card is now back on the bench table, running under load, and it's also in the normal state, so the turbo button is not pressed. After a quick heat up phase, 3D Mark Speedway looped testing, I could observe a GPU clock between 2750 and 2780 MHz. Memory is always at 1875, the GPU at about 63 degrees Celsius, memory at 66 degrees Celsius. There's definitely headroom on both GPU and memory temperature that the fans could actually spin a little bit slower. They're about 1700 RPM. I think you could easily manually tune them to 1600 RPM and still be in a very good range for GPU temperature. The card definitely has potential to be more quiet than it is right now, even though it's not loud, but it could still be more quiet simply by utilizing more of the headroom. So that could be done by manual fan tuning. Also, what I could see is that it's always running as expected at 100% TDP, which translates to the board power draw constantly of 360 watts. The system is powered off and we're now pressing the turbo button. You might notice that everything is a little bit blurry, so it's not sharp. And that is because the graphics card driver is being reinstalled now. And with this, the graphics card driver is reinstalled. Now again, after heat up phase, we can see that the GPU clock increased a little bit, but only a little bit. We saw maybe 40 megahertz increase overall, so it's now 2800 megahertz on average. I would say sometimes drops to 2797, but it's about 2800 megahertz on the GPU now. Memory clock is still the same, GPU temperature is the same, memory temperature the same. Also, the fan speeds are the same. Power consumption, nothing changed. But as you could see, the graphics card driver was reinstalled, which also confirms that this is not just a simple button, but it's actually a BIOS switch. So the same as what you have on an MSI card or like on an ASUS card with the PQ mode, it is just switching to a different BIOS. And what I could also observe, it's not only the 40 megahertz difference on the GPU, but it's also unlocking the power target. But it's unlocking from max 100% to 104. Like we're unlocking 4%. And yeah, it looks like a really useless feature to me. The fact that you press it and it's one-click OC and you get like 40 megahertz on the GPU and you could then increase the power limit by 4%. I don't know, yeah. I'm now rerunning the normal speedway to also get an impression of the performance in the turbo mode. The result is 92 FPS, which is about 3% faster than a 5080 Founders Edition from NVIDIA, and it's on exactly the same level as a 5080 Astral by ASUS in the Q mode. I quickly want to highlight the iGame software because it's a software that works flawlessly for me, has no issues, doesn't cause unnecessary background load. You have a nice overview once you start it up with system parameters, also monitoring on the right. If you go to hardware, it is very simple to set your RGB stuff. And what I like is that you don't need this software to be running in order to have the RGB working. So on a system startup, this will not start, but there is a small background service just responsible for the RGB that doesn't need any kind of system resources. That is awesome, and it just works flawlessly. That is something I absolutely love about this software. You can also switch to overclock on the bottom, and then you can, it's very similar to MSI Afterburner or GPU Tweak. You can set all the different things such as the power target, can adjust your custom fan curve if you want to, and even 2 different ways of overclocking the GPU. That is the normal regulator for the boost clock, and if you want to manually fix the GPU, you could also do it with this slider, but I'm not quite sure why you would actually do that. The card clocks in a very similar range to all the other 5080s and like 5070s. It's about 10% performance boost that you can get, and it is purely power limited. I can see between 3150 to 3180 on the GPU when it comes to the clock, but as you can see, its fully power limit always reaches the 380 watts under load, and the clock that was set in the iGame Center was 3038 megahertz. I definitely have to finally do a shunt mod video because no matter which card you're taking, any 5080, 5070 Ti, they're all so heavily power limited. But I'm also not sure how much the power will get out of hand once we do that. But I feel like that there is definitely some performance left where NVIDIA is just putting their hard limit on, because you can so easy clock these cards and get the extra, I don't know, 10% performance on, it feels like, all of these cards, and they all seem to behave roughly the same. What I forgot to mention so far is they also include this white power adapter, which I think is cool, especially for white builds. Kind of a pity that it's so small or so short, because it still means that you would have to have white PSU cables, otherwise it just wouldn't look that nice. Unfortunately, some missed potential here. It is an aluminum backplate, but it's not used for anything, like except for making it look nice, which it definitely does, but they could have used some thermal pads on some part of the backplate, just to spread some heat, make use of it. Also on this card, similar to the ASUS TUF or the MSI card that I recently reviewed, Once you remove the back plate and the screws of this one, you can take off the fan shroud completely. Well, after you also unclip the cable, obviously, but then you can take off the fan shroud. And underneath, you will find the heatsink. That's kind of interesting. They all are made exactly the same way, like in exactly the same pattern of how the backplate sits on it, how the screws fit on it, and in the same order you take it off and then you can take off the fan shroud. And that's pure speculation. So either they all come out of the exactly same factory, or at least the cooler design was made by the same company. But that's just, yeah, too many coincidences at the same time. That's, yeah, kind of weird. Huge heatsink with 8 heat pipes, everything looked great, so imprint of the thermal paste to the GPU, imprint on all the thermal pads to the memory, also inductors, MOSFETs, everything seemed to have good contact. Yeah, nice nickel-plated copper heatsink. The PCB seems to be a full custom design, at least it doesn't match any of the cards that I have seen so far, may it be MSI Gigabyte, Asus, Palit, whatever. This one is quite a bit different, starting from the print on the inductors, also the placement of inductors, caps, power stages, everything seems to be custom. Also interesting, all those empty solder pads on the left side of the GPU. Could be for MLCCs, but I'm not sure. Kind of interesting, I've never seen this so far on any other 5080. Overall, nice card in multiple aspects. So starting from the design, which I just like, that Colorful is doing things differently than other vendors. I just hope that they will bring a CAD edition of the 50 series. And I will definitely try to look out for it. And if they do some or do one, then I will definitely try to get it so we can show it on the channel and review it. But also from how it performed, it was good. Noise level was in a good region, also coil whine almost not noticeable, which is great. The only thing I would maybe change is how this one-click button is advertised or documented. I mean, it technically changes the clock, so it's not wrong, but it mainly also changes the power target, and that should be added at least to the technical documentation. But I'm also not sure, you know, Colorful is mainly targeting the Asian and Chinese market, so their Chinese website also contains a lot more information than the international one. So I'm not sure if something is getting lost in translation maybe as well. So that's something I definitely want to keep in mind. But apart from that, nice card, and Colorful, thanks again for letting us review it. See you next time. Bye bye.